The workshop smelled of aged cedar wood and linseed oil, scents that had become Damien Cross's only companions over the past 7 years. His hands moved with practiced precision across the belly of an antique mandolin, fingers tracing hairline cracks that needed filling. Outside, the city hummed with evening traffic, but inside these brick walls, time moved differently. Here, broken things found purpose again. Here, silence was sacred. Damien preferred it that way. The instruments never asked questions, never looked at him with expectation or disappointment. They simply waited, patient and honest, for him to understand their needs. At 35, he'd mastered the art of restoration, but remained stubbornly broken himself. The bell above the door chimed, just as the last rays of autumn sunlight painted the workshop gold. Damien didn't look up immediately. Customers always hesitated at the threshold, overwhelmed by the sheer number of instruments covering every surface. Violins, cellos, guitars, banjos, even a harp missing half its strings. Each one a story waiting to continue. "Excuse me." The voice was soft but clear, like a single note played perfectly in tune. "I was told you're the person to see about restoration work." Damien set down his tools and finally raised his eyes. The woman standing in his doorway was petite, maybe 5'3", with copper-colored hair pulled into a loose braid. She wore a navy peacoat and carried a violin case with both hands, the way someone might hold something precious and fragile. Her eyes were hazel, striking against her pale skin, and they studied him with an openness that made him uncomfortable. "Depends on the instrument," Damien replied, his voice rough from hours of not speaking. He wiped his hands on his work apron and stood, his 6-foot frame unfolding from the stool. "What do you have?" The woman stepped forward, carefully navigating around a cello stand. "My mother's violin. She passed away 6 months ago, and I inherited it, but it's been damaged. I'm not sure how badly." She placed the case on his workbench with reverence. Damien noticed her hands trembling slightly as she opened the clasps. When she lifted the lid, he understood why. The violin inside was exquisite. Late 19th century, possibly German craftsmanship. The wood had a deep amber color that spoke of age and care, but the bridge had collapsed. The neck had separated slightly from the body, and several cracks spider-webbed across the back. "Can you fix it?" she asked, her voice catching on the last word. Damien lifted the instrument gently, cradling it in his large hands. He tilted it toward the light, examining every angle, every imperfection. His fingers ghosted over the damage, with a touch so delicate it seemed impossible for hands his size. "Yes," he said, after a long moment. "It'll take time, maybe 6 weeks, but I can restore it." Relief flooded her features. "Thank you. I'm Celeste, by the way. Celeste Morgan." She extended her hand. Damien looked at it for a beat too long before accepting the gesture. Her grip was firm despite her small stature. "Damien Cross." The hands separated quickly. Damien turned his attention back to the violin, more comfortable with the broken instrument than human connection. "Did your mother play professionally?" he asked, mostly to fill the silence. "She taught at the conservatory for 30 years, Celeste said, and there was pride mixed with grief in her tone. "She started me on violin when I was 4. This was her favorite instrument. She always said it had the purest voice of any she'd owned." Damien ran his thumb along the edge of the sound hole. "She was right. The acoustic properties are exceptional. When it's repaired, it'll sing. You can tell that just by holding it. Everything speaks, if you know how to listen." The words came out before he could stop them, more revealing than he intended. Celeste tilted her head, studying him with that same unnerving openness. "That's beautiful. Most people see broken things as trash. You see them as voices waiting to be heard." Damien felt heat creep up his neck. Compliments always made him uncomfortable, especially from someone who looked at him like he was worth understanding. "It's just work," he deflected. "I'll need a deposit, half up front, half on completion." They discussed price and timeline, the conversation returning to safe, transactional territory. But as Celeste prepared to leave, she paused at the door. "Can I come by sometime to check on the progress? I know it's unusual, But this violin, it's all I have left of her. Every instinct told Damien to say no, to maintain the boundaries that kept him safe. But something in her expression, vulnerable and hopeful, made him hesitate. Once a week, he heard himself say, "Thursdays around 3. Celeste's smile was like sunlight breaking through clouds. "Thank you, Damien, really." After she left, the workshop felt emptier than usual. Damien stood there holding her mother's violin, aware of the faint scent of jasmine she'd left behind. He shook his head, annoyed at himself for noticing. This was a mistake. He should have said no to the visits, should have kept everything professional and distant like he always did. But as he carefully placed the violin on his restoration table, preparing to begin the delicate work of bringing it back to life, he couldn't quite convince himself he regretted the decision. Outside, darkness settled over the city. Inside the workshop, Damien turned on his work lamp and picked up his tools. The violin waited patiently, ready to reveal its secrets to hands that understood brokenness intimately. He took a breath and began. Thursday arrived faster than Damien expected. He'd spent the week working on Celeste's violin with unusual focus, carefully separating the neck from the body, cleaning decades of accumulated residue, preparing each crack for repair. The work was meticulous, demanding complete attention, yet his mind kept drifting to those hazel eyes and that jasmine scent. At 2:55, he found himself glancing at the door. At 2:58, he caught himself smoothing down his shirt. At 3 o'clock exactly, the bell chimed. Celeste entered carrying 2 paper cups and a small bakery bag. She wore jeans and a cream-colored sweater that made her copper hair seem even more vibrant. "I brought coffee," she said, holding up the cups. "I figured you might need caffeine after working on delicate repairs all week. I hope black is okay. I didn't know how you take it." Damien stared at the offered cup, momentarily thrown. No one ever brought him coffee. No one ever thought about him outside the transaction of broken instruments and payment. "Black is fine," he managed, accepting the cup. Their fingers brushed during the exchange, and he pulled back quickly. Celeste didn't seem to notice his discomfort. She set the bakery bag on the only clear corner of his workbench. "I also brought cinnamon rolls from this amazing place on 5th Street. Have you eaten lunch? I usually work through lunch." "That's what I thought." She opened the bag, revealing 2 enormous pastries glazed with white icing. "You can't do detailed work on an empty stomach. My mother used to say that hunger makes your hands shake." Before Damien could protest that he was fine, his stomach betrayed him with an audible growl. Celeste laughed, warm and genuine, and somehow that sound made the workshop feel less like a tomb. They ate in companionable silence, standing at the workbench. Damien couldn't remember the last time someone had shared a meal with him here. Maybe never. His ex-girlfriend had hated the workshop, called it depressing and cluttered. She'd never understood why he chose to spend his days surrounded by damaged instruments instead of pursuing something more ambitious. "Can I see it?" Celeste asked, gesturing toward the violin laid carefully on the restoration table. Damien wiped his hands on a cloth and led her over. "I've disassembled it completely. See here. The neck needs to be reset at the proper angle. These cracks along the back require cleating from the inside. The bridge is beyond repair, so I'm carving a new one from aged maple." Celeste leaned in, studying the separated pieces with fascination. "It looks so vulnerable like this, like seeing someone's heart opened up." "That's exactly what it is," Damien said quietly. "Every instrument has a heart, a soul. The top plate is its voice. The back reflects and amplifies. The sound post inside is literally called the soul in French. When you repair an instrument, you're not just fixing wood. You're healing something that once sang." Celeste turned to look at him, and there was something in her expression that made him nervous. Understanding, maybe, or recognition. "You really love this, don't you? It's not just a job." Damien stepped back, creating distance. "It's what I'm good at." "That's not what I asked." The directness caught him off guard. Most people accepted his deflections, but Celeste seemed determined to see past them. "Yes," he admitted. "I love it. These instruments, they've lived entire lifetimes. They've played at weddings and funerals, in concert halls and living rooms. They've brought joy and comfort. And when they break, people throw them away or let them rot in attics. But they deserve better. They deserve to sing again. Celeste's eyes glistened slightly. That's exactly how I feel about my mother's violin. Everyone kept telling me to just buy a new one, that old instruments aren't worth the cost of restoration. But it's not about the money. It's about preserving something irreplaceable. Exactly. Damien found himself smiling, a rare expression that felt strange on his face. Most people don't understand that. My mother would have liked you, Celeste said softly. She always said the best craftspeople are the ones who see souls in objects. They stood there for a moment, the afternoon light filtering through the dusty windows, creating golden beams between them. Damien felt something shift in his chest, a crack in the walls he'd built so carefully. Tell me about her, he found himself saying. Your mother, what was she like? Celeste's face illuminated with memory. She told him stories while he worked, her voice filling the workshop with warmth. She described her mother's passion for teaching, how she could take a struggling student and find the one thing that would unlock their potential. She talked about Sunday morning practice sessions, her mother making hot chocolate while Celeste worked through difficult passages. She had this way of listening, Celeste said, watching Damien's hands as he carefully applied hide glue to a crack. Not just to music, but to people. She could hear what you weren't saying, what you needed even when you didn't know yourself. Sounds like she was remarkable. She was. Celeste paused, then added quietly, I miss her every day. But working again, performing, it's been hard. Every time I pick up a violin, I hear her corrections, her encouragement. Sometimes it's comforting, sometimes it's crushing. Damien set down his brush and looked at her directly. Grief doesn't follow a schedule. It comes in waves. Some days you can breathe through it. Other days it drowns you. Something in his tone made Celeste study him more carefully. You sound like you know from experience. He turned back to the violin, uncomfortable with the scrutiny. Everyone loses people eventually. That's true. But not everyone understands grief the way you just described it. Not everyone recognizes the waves. Damien didn't respond. He couldn't tell her about the losses that had shaped him, the relationship that had shattered him so completely he'd rebuilt his entire life around solitude. That was territory he didn't explore, not even with himself. But Celeste didn't push. She seemed to understand the boundary, respecting it while still remaining present. She asked about his process instead, genuinely curious about wood types and varnish compositions and the science of acoustics. The hour passed quickly. When Celeste finally gathered her things to leave, Damien felt an unexpected reluctance to see her go. Same time next week, she asked at the door. Yes. I should have the body reassembled by then. Celeste smiled. I'm looking forward to it. And Damien, thank you for sharing your stories about the instruments. It makes me feel like my mother's violin is in caring hands. After she left, Damien stood in the middle of his workshop, aware of how empty it suddenly felt. The jasmine scent lingered again, mixing with the cedar and oil. He looked at the disassembled violin on his table, and for the first time in years, he felt something other than resignation about his solitary life. He felt lonely. The realization disturbed him enough that he threw himself back into work, staying late into the evening, trying to exhaust himself enough that he wouldn't think about copper hand, hazel eyes, and a voice that made his workshop feel less like a refuge and more like a hiding place. But even as his hands moved with precision, gluing and clamping and measuring, his mind kept returning to one question. What was he hiding from? And more importantly, why did Celeste make him want to stop? 3 Thursdays passed, and each visit chipped away at Damien's carefully constructed walls. Celeste brought coffee, pastries, sometimes just her presence and endless curiosity. She asked about his apprenticeship, his favorite woods, the most challenging repair he'd ever attempted. And somehow, without meaning to, Damien found himself answering. He told her about learning the craft from his grandfather, about the first violin he'd successfully restored at 16, about the transcendent moment when an instrument's voice returned after months of silent work. He talked more in those few hours with Celeste than he had in entire years alone, but he never talked about himself. Not really, not the parts that mattered. On the fourth Thursday, Celeste arrived earlier than usual, carrying no coffee, no treats. Her eyes were red-rimmed, her movements subdued. "Are you all right?" Damien asked before he could stop himself. Celeste tried to smile but failed. "It's the anniversary, 6 months today, since she died. I thought I was handling it well, but this morning I just double quotes." Her voice cracked. "I couldn't get out of bed for an hour. Everything felt too heavy." Damien set down his tools. For once, he didn't overthink it. He simply opened his arms. Celeste stepped into his embrace, and he held her while she cried against his chest. His large frame enveloped her small one, and he rested his chin gently on top of her head. She smelled like jasmine and saltaires, and something in his chest constricted painfully. "I'm sorry," she mumbled against his shirt. "I didn't come here to fall apart." "You're not falling apart," Damien said quietly. "You're grieving. There's a difference." She pulled back slightly, looking up at him with those hazel eyes. "How do you always know the right thing to say?" "I don't. I just know what I wish someone had said to me." The words slipped out before he could catch them. Celeste's expression shifted, becoming more focused despite her tears. "What happened to you, Damien?" He should have deflected, should have stepped back and returned to safe territory. But her vulnerability called to something in him, something that had been locked away for so long he'd forgotten it existed. "Let me show you the violin first," he said finally. "Then we can talk." He led her to the restoration table, where her mother's instrument lay complete, reassembled and revarnished. The wood glowed with renewed life, the cracks invisible, the neck reset perfectly. Celeste gasped. "It's beautiful. It looks better than I remember." "It's not finished yet. Still needs final setup and adjustment. But the major restoration is done." Damien picked up the violin carefully, positioning it under his chin. He'd already installed temporary strings to test the repair. He drew the bow across, playing a simple scale. The notes rang clear and pure, filling the workshop with sound. Celeste covered her mouth with both hands, tears streaming freely now. That's her voice. That's exactly how it sounded when she played. Damien lowered the instrument, moved by her reaction. "Your mother had good taste. The tone is exceptional. Play something else, please." He hesitated, then began a simple melody, one his grandfather had taught him decades ago. As he played, he watched Celeste's face transform from grief to something like peace. When he finished, she was smiling through her tears. "You play beautifully. I didn't know you were a musician too." "I'm not. I just know enough to test my repairs." That was more than testing. Celeste stepped closer. That was feeling. That was soul. Damien set the violin down carefully, his walls crumbling. "I used to play, before, but I gave it up." "Why?" And there it was, the question he'd been avoiding for 7 years. The truth he'd buried beneath sawdust and solitude. "I was engaged once," he began, the words coming slowly, painfully. "Her name was Victoria. We met in college, dated for 5 years. She was brilliant, ambitious, beautiful. I thought she was everything I needed." He moved to the window, looking out at the street rather than at Celeste. "She was also ashamed of me. Not at first, but gradually. She hated that I wanted to restore instruments instead of pursuing something prestigious. Hated that I was content with this small workshop instead of building an empire. She wanted me to be different, bigger, more successful by her definition." Damien's hands clenched. "I tried. God, I tried. I applied for corporate positions I hated. Started dressing differently, talking differently, becoming someone I didn't recognize. And the more I changed, the less of myself remained. I stopped playing music because she said it was a waste of time. Stopped seeing friends because they weren't ambitious enough for her circle." "What happened?" Celeste asked softly from behind him. "She left anyway. Said I was fundamentally insufficient, that I'd always be a disappointment. That settling for someone like me was beneath her potential." The words still stung, but all these years. "She walked out 2 weeks before our wedding. and I realized I'd destroyed myself trying to become worthy of someone who would never see my worth. He turned to face Celeste, vulnerability and shame warring in his expression. So I built this place. I surrounded myself with broken instruments because at least I knew how to fix them. At least with them, I understood the damage. I could see exactly what was wrong and exactly how to repair it. People are messy, eh? People hurt you in ways you can't sand smooth or glue back together. Celeste crossed the space between them, taking his hands in her smaller ones. Damien, she was wrong. You're not insufficient. You're not a disappointment. You're a man who sees beauty in broken things and dedicates himself to healing them. That's not small. That's extraordinary. You don't understand, he said, his voice breaking. I'm not good at this, at letting people in, at being vulnerable. I've spent 7 years teaching myself not to need anyone, not to want connection. And then you walked in here with your mother's violin and your genuine curiosity and your kindness, and you've unraveled everything in a month. Is that a bad thing? I don't know, he admitted. It terrifies me. You terrify me. Because you make me want things I swore I'd never want again. You make me hope, and hope is dangerous when you've learned that you're not enough. Celeste reached up, placing her palm against his cheek. Her touch was warm and steady. You are enough, Damien. You've always been enough. Victoria couldn't see it because she was looking for someone to complete her ambitions instead of someone to share a life with. But I see you, the real you, the man who speaks about instruments like they're living beings, who works until his hands ache to bring beauty back into the world, who held me while I cried even though physical closeness clearly makes you uncomfortable. That man is more than enough. Damien closed his eyes, leaning into her touch. What if I disappoint you too? What if I'm still that same insufficient person underneath? You won't, and you're not. Celeste's voice was certain that even if you stumble, even if you have bad days or make mistakes, I'm not Victoria. I'm not looking for perfection. I'm just looking for honesty, for presence, for someone who sees me as clearly as I see them. He opened his eyes, looking down at her. I do see you. That's the problem. I see how remarkable you are, and I can't understand why you keep coming back here. Because you're remarkable too, and because for the first time since my mother died, I don't feel alone. When I'm here, in this workshop, with you, I feel like I can breathe again. They stood there, hands joined, something fragile and precious forming between them. Damien felt the last of his walls crumbling, felt himself standing at a precipice. He could step back to safety, to the solitude he knew how to navigate, or he could step forward into uncertainty with someone who saw his scars and called them beautiful. I don't know how to do this, he whispered. How to let someone in. How to trust that they'll stay. Neither do I, Celeste admitted. But maybe we can figure it out together. One Thursday at a time, Damien searched her face, looking for any sign of doubt or deception. He found only openness, only invitation. Slowly, giving her time to pull away, he leaned down. Celeste rose on her toes, meeting him halfway. Their lips touched, soft and tentative, a question and an answer simultaneously. When they separated, both were trembling slightly. One Thursday at a time, Damien repeated, his voice rough with emotion. I think I can manage that. Celeste smiled, brilliant and genuine. Good, because I'm not going anywhere. For the first time in 7 years, Damien allowed himself to believe her. The violin was complete. Damien had finished the final adjustments 3 days ago, but he hadn't called Celeste yet. The instrument hung on its stand in the workshop, perfect and whole, ready to sing again. But calling her meant ending their Thursday afternoons. It meant returning to the transactional relationship of craftsman and client. It meant potentially losing the connection they'd built over 6 weeks of coffee and conversation and careful vulnerability. He was being a coward, and he knew it. Thursday arrived anyway. Celeste came through the door at 3 o'clock exactly, carrying 2 cups of coffee and wearing a deep green dress that made her eyes seem more golden than hazel. It's done, isn't it? She asked, setting down the cups and looking at the violin on display. You've been avoiding telling me. Damien couldn't lie to her. Yes, it's been ready since Monday. But you didn't call. No. Celeste turned to face him fully. Why not? Because I'm selfish, he admitted. Because once I give you the violin back, you have no reason to keep coming here. And I've gotten used to Thursdays. I've gotten used to you. Something softened in her expression. Damien, did you really think I was only coming here for the violin? Wasn't that the original reason? Maybe at first. But by the second week, I was coming to see you. The violin was just an excuse. She stepped closer. I like being here. I like talking to you. I like watching your hands work and listening to your stories about wood grain and acoustic properties. I like that you actually listen when I talk instead of just waiting for your turn to speak. I like listening to you, he said quietly. You make silence feel less necessary. Celeste smiled. So what are we doing here? Are we going to pretend this is still just a business transaction? Or are we going to acknowledge what's actually happening? Damien's heart hammered against his ribs. This was the moment, the precipice. He could make a joke, deflect, return to the safety of professional distance. Or he could jump. I'm falling for you, he said. The words raw and honest. I'd been fighting it because I'm terrified. Because the last time I let someone in, I lost myself trying to become what she wanted. Because I don't know how to do this without destroying who I am in the process. Then don't, Celeste said simply. Don't change. Don't become someone else. I don't want a different version of you. I want this one. The one who hides in his workshop and talks to violins and takes an hour to say what he's feeling, because vulnerability is hard for him. I want the real Damien, not some modified edition. What if the real me isn't enough for a relationship? What if I'm too closed off, too damaged, too set in my solitary ways? Celeste closed the remaining distance between them, placing both hands on his chest. What if you're exactly right? What if we fit together precisely because we're both a little damaged, both still healing, both learning how to trust again? Damien covered her hands with his own. I can't promise I'll be good at this. I'll probably pull away sometimes. I'll probably struggle with openness. I'll probably spend too much time in my own head. And I'll probably have grief days where I can barely function. I'll probably need reassurance more than is reasonable. I'll probably bring you coffee even when you say you don't want any, because I show love through feeding people. Celeste tilted her head up to look at him. We're not looking for perfect, Damien. We're looking for real. And real is messy and complicated and scary. But it's also worth it. He searched her face, looking for any hint of doubt. You're sure you want to take this chance on someone as broken as me? You're not broken, she said firmly. You're healing. There's a difference. And yes, I'm sure. Are you? Was he? Could he really risk his heart again? Could he trust that this time would be different? Damien thought about the past 6 weeks, thought about how Celeste had never asked him to be anything other than himself, how she'd accepted his silences and his struggles without judgment, how she'd shared her own grief and pain without expecting him to fix her, how she'd walked into his workshop and made it feel less like a tomb and more like a home. Yes, he said finally. I'm sure, terrified, but sure. Celeste's smile was radiant. Good, because I'm terrified too. But I'd rather be terrified with you than safe without you. Damien leaned down, kissing her properly this time, not tentative or questioning, but certain. A declaration. She melted against him, her small frame fitting perfectly against his larger one, and for the first time in 7 years, Damien felt complete. When they separated, both breathless, Celeste laughed softly. So what now? Do I still have to wait until Thursday to see you? Absolutely not, Damien said, surprising himself with how easily the words came. You can come by whenever you want, or I can come to you, or we can go somewhere that isn't a workshop full of broken instruments. But I like the broken instruments. They're part of you. They're not broken anymore once I'm done with them. They're restored, whole again. Better for having survived their damage. Celeste touched his face gently. Just like you. The words hit him with unexpected force. Was that what was happening? Was he being restored? Was Celeste healing the cracks he'd carried for so long that he'd forgotten they weren't supposed to be permanent? "Play it for me," Celeste said suddenly, gesturing to her mother's violin. "I want to hear you play it now that it's complete." Damien retrieved the instrument, positioning it carefully. He'd installed the final strings yesterday, adjusting the sound post until the tone was perfect. He lifted the bow, took a breath, and began to play. The melody that emerged was one he'd written years ago, before Victoria, before his self-imposed isolation. It was hopeful and melancholic simultaneously, full of longing and possibility. He'd never played it for anyone, but he played it now for Celeste, pouring 7 years of loneliness and healing and newfound hope into every note. When he finished, Celeste was crying again, but these were different tears, happy tears. That was beautiful. What was it? Something I wrote a long time ago. I'd forgotten I remembered it. "Play with me," she said suddenly. "I'll get my practicing violin. We can play together." They spent the rest of the afternoon making music in the workshop, the restored violin singing alongside Celeste's modern instrument. Their playing was imperfect, occasionally out of sync, but it didn't matter. What mattered was the harmony they created together, two voices learning to blend, two souls learning to trust. As evening shadows lengthened across the workshop floor, they finally set down their instruments. Celeste moved into Damien's arms naturally, as if she'd always belonged there. "Thank you," she said quietly, "for fixing my mother's violin, for letting me invade your Thursdays, for taking a chance on this, on us." "Thank you," Damien replied, "for walking into my workshop and refusing to let me hide, for seeing past the walls I'd built, for being patient while I figured out how to let you in. So where do we go from here?" Celeste asked. Damien thought about it, about all the fears and uncertainties that still existed, but he also thought about how it felt to hold her, to make music with her, to imagine a future that included more than just silence and solitude. "Forward," he said simply. "Together, one day at a time." Celeste smiled against his chest. "One day at a time. I can work with that." They stood there as the workshop filled with twilight, to broken instruments that had found their way to harmony. The road ahead would have challenges. Damien would struggle with openness. Celeste would have grief days. They would both stumble as they learned to build something together rather than apart. But they would face it together, and somehow, that made all the difference. Outside, the city hummed with evening life. Inside the workshop, among the restored instruments and lingering scent of cedar and jasmine, Damien allowed himself to hope, not carefully or cautiously, but fully, because some things were worth the risk, some people were worth the vulnerability, and some loves were worth believing in, even when belief felt impossible. Especially then. The end of this story is a testament to the power of acceptance, the courage of vulnerability, and the healing that comes from being seen completely and loved anyway. Sometimes the greatest restoration isn't of broken objects, but of broken hearts learning to trust again.